Hi, I'm the OBG. Believe it or not, I just done a show and recorded it. I gave it everything I had. Yeah, I was going for Oscars. I even bowed afterwards, and I forgot to hit the go live button. So I wasn't live. Let me just make sure. Okay, yes, everything looks good right now. So I'm live. I'm going to go straight down to business. So I'm not entirely sure, but I do think that people are vaping less. The fad period is definitely on the wane, and the only true vapers remain, perhaps. However, for those of you that do vape, there are reports that vaping is bad for you. So let's talk about it. Okay, so the evidence is in, and vaping is bad for you, but mostly if you're American, it seems. Obviously, there's all the other countries in the world, and some of those are suffering from the same symptoms, which I'm going to talk about a little later on. But first of all, I typically talk about the UK and America, because they're the big bullies, they're the one that everyone's watching. So, well, most people are watching. Let's get to know a little bit about the recent fad. So, vaping is a method of inhalation. It's been around since the 1960s, and it was further developed by a Chinese pharmacist named Hon Lik, who designed what would become the first commercially successful electronic cigarette, or e-cig, in 2003, after he lost his father to lung cancer. And moving on, there have been 40 related deaths and up to 2,000 cases of illness in the US, and the UK toll stands at 7 deaths. Okay, so what's causing all these issues? Apparently, it's a form of vitamin E which has been identified as what they describe a very strong culprit in lung injuries related to vaping, or mostly to vaping THC. Health officials reported that as a major advance in the worrying outbreak in the States that has so far killed those people, many of the patients with the mysterious illness wound up hospitalised in intensive care units, with some requiring ventilators to help them breathe, and the majority were young adult males and teenagers. So Dr. Anne Schuchat, who is a Principal Deputy Director of the Centres for Disease Control and Prevention, she said that for the first time we have detected a potential toxin of concern, vitamin E acetate, from biological samples from patients. And she added, based on samples taken from the lungs of patients, including 2 who died, it provided evidence of vitamin E acetate as the primary site of injury in those who they studied, the lungs. Also, health officials in Illinois did a study with just over 4,600 adults over 18 that vape, and provided the following information. The patients who became ill were more likely to vape only THC and to use it frequently, more than 5 times a day. They were 9 times likely to buy THC from informal sources like dealers, friends, or on the street, and 8 times as likely to have used dank vapes, which the officials described as a class of largely counterfeit THC containing products which come from unknown sources. But road gear aside, I'll share some of the common things that people are saying about vaping. For instance, many people saying that vape lowers the body's ability to fight infections. Chemicals in vape smoke can cause popcorn lung, and the buds at Harvard, they found that e-cig flavouring caused permanent damage or scarred lungs, and the flavouring chemicals 2,3-pentanedione and diacetyl systematically destroyed the lung's smallest airways, and that resulted in a lung condition known as bronchiolitis obliterans, or popcorn lung. And the level of nicotines are loosely monitored, and in some of the newer tanks, they have greater concentrations of nicotine which are being delivered due to their power, and this is increasing the likelihood of addiction. The ingestion of vape liquid is also poisonous, and there was a significant increase in poisoning, with a 300% increase over the previous year. And poisoning actually occurs in 3 ways: ingestion, inhalation, or absorption, which is through the eyes and skin. And an even more alarming finding showed that over half of those emergencies involved young children under the age of 5. And this is possibly because of the sweet fruit flavours and the attractive packaging, along with careless parenting, that has to be said. And the list goes on. And those colours, I must admit, they're really brightly coloured. They look nice, and they do look like sweets or liquid you can drink. So parents, educate yourself when something new comes out. and keep those away from your children. They should be up in the poisons cupboard, up with the medicines, not on the living room table with your vape. Anyway, the list goes on, as I said. So do research, use DuckDuckGo, anything but Google, and have a good read. And meanwhile, in the UK, a couple of months ago, Martin Dockrell, who is the head of tobacco control at Public Health in England, he drew a distinction between vaping in the States and the UK. And he said reports suggested that most cases in the US had been linked to people using illicit vaping fluid bought on the streets or homemade, and some containing cannabis products like THC or synthetic cannabinoids like spice, and that unlike in the US, all e-cigarette products in the UK are tightly regulated for equality and the safety of people by the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, and that they operate the yellow card scheme, encouraging vapers to report any bad experiences. So it's likely that the US will see vaping banned in the reactionary states, or more likely restrictions coming with tougher regulations. And it seems that we still have a green light in the UK. So do bear in mind, it's a multi-million pound industry, so I can't see it going anywhere soon. Cigarette, anyone? Anyway, happy vaping. And remember, this is a show about the people, by the people, for the people, and it can work better if you contribute. So please send your stories, things you want me to cover, images, videos, or your music to obgchat@gmail.com, and together we can do this.
A show about the people, by the people, for the people.
And the aim is to create a show that grows until we have regular viewers that we can pull away from the mainstream for 10 minutes every day, whereby you are the producers.
You're the producers of the show. I just wanna let you know.
And the measure of our success would be that pulling people away for 10 minutes, okay?
So baby, I will be listening to OBG.
Okay, so I've asked people to send stuff in, requests, or their own stuff as well, and I received a couple recently that asked me to share what I know about the birth certificate. So let's talk about it. Doing this twice hurts. Anyway, the birth certificate is the source of all Adhesion contracts, and by the way, an Adhesion contract is a legally binding agreement between two parties to do a certain thing, in which one side has all the bargaining power and uses it to write the contract primarily to their advantage. Just bear with me a sec. Let's see if anyone's coming on. Okay, superb. Say hello if you're there. Okay, superb, Fonzie. Mr. Dan Fonzie. So the birth certificate actually creates an artificial entity, and in the beginning that entity is merely a name, and that is attached to other names of state-certified parents, doctors, informants, the parents, and a place. And the certificate is a written instrument created by a registrar who is an employee or agent of a jurisdiction of the place in which the certificate is created. Neither the registrar nor his principal created the human baby, who was the granular object for the certifying process. The only things that the state can give authority to and create are artificial entities and legal fictions. So, sorry to sound patronising, but listen very carefully. A legal fiction is the assumption that a certain thing is true, and which gives to a person or thing a quality which is not natural to it, and consequently establishes a certain disposition which without the fiction would be repugnant to reason and to truth. So in layman's terms, what I'm trying to say is, what that actually says is, a legal fiction is something that doesn't exist, but is created and assigned to a thing or a person, allowing it to be acted upon. And this is what we are when we own up to being the name. But I'm going to push that about the name more, and there's more on that to follow. So, a birth certificate is executed by signing, filing, and recording it, which constitutes the act of wholly bringing the certificate and the artificial entry it creates into separate, distinct, unique being. The subject matter of the written instrument, certificate, is the live birth of an infant, but it is not the live birth that is executed by signing, filing and recording the certificate. That had already been accomplished, usually days before by filing, but days before the filing, by conception and gestation, consummated by a child being born. Neither the state nor its registrar had anything to do with executing the live birth. Remember that term, the live birth, when you came out. So, the date specification in the written instrument of the time when it was executed is the day, month and year on which the certificate was signed and filed, i.e. the time it was executed, when the official name of the artificial entity, the legal fiction mentioned in the certificate, was wholly brought into separate existence. This is the date of birth of the record of the entity. Natural persons, us, real life flesh and blood people, we have birthdays which commemorate anniversaries of us being brought wholly into the world. We do not have birth dates. There's both distinct things, birthday and birth dates. There is nothing about those dates in the nature of commemoration or memorial. Nothing happy, sad or otherwise emotional about them. Such dates of birth are merely cold, dispassionate facts which testify to the time and place of the birth of the certificate. We're free to go by any other name except when we apply for any of the benefits that the state provides for us. We're under no legal or moral compulsion to use a name attributed to us on a birth certificate. However, if we use that name or a similar variation of it, we must be very careful in separating the two, because there are two, the natural and the artificial creatures. And the most important thing to remember is that you are not the name, and the name is not you. So when you are acting as attorney, an attorney is a person who is legally qualified and licensed to represent a person in a legal matter for the artificial being, you should provide your birth date when required by business dealings. Other than that, if you wish to enjoy the rights inherent in natural individuals, as a natural human being, you should distinguish between dates and days and never state that your birth date is the same as your birthday. The safest course is to avoid situations such as applying for or using benefits. And I don't mean the dole. Benefits mean anything that you need to beg the state for by providing your birth date. I keep on doing that because they sound the same. Birthday, birth date. And if you do that, the birth date may be innocently construed as intent to obligate you to do things as a natural person. So since their introduction, most people believe birth certificates to be beneficial, believing that they established reliable records for genealogy, assist them with inheritances, probate matters and other legal causes. And our lack of knowledge is what permits those who control us to use them against us. Even today, most people still believe that birth certificates are actually harmless and beneficial. And the danger with birth certificates is that with just a little indoctrination by parents, governments, schools, most people can't distinguish between the natural person and the artificial person. And they do this primarily as a result of being trained from childhood, as we all are, to believe the date of birth, I'm going to say that again, date of birth is synonymous with the day of birth. After a while, most people can't distinguish between the name and their mortal being. They say, for instance, I am Cedric Edwards, I am John Smith, I am Wendy Jones, when that kind of supersedes them ever saying, my name is Wendy Jones, my name is Cedric Edwards, my name is John Smith. And it is this indoctrinated inability to distinguish between the two that gets people into serious trouble. So we enter into adhesion contracts with government agencies that strip us the ability to exercise natural rights and obligate us to all manner of demeaning servitude. So an adhesion contract in Black's Law's dictionary is defined as standardised contract form offered to consumers of goods and services on essentially take it or leave it basis without affording consumers realistic opportunity to bargain, and under such conditions that consumers cannot obtain desired products or services except by acquiescing in form contract. Distinctive feature of adhesion contracts is that weaker party has no realistic choice as to its terms. Now that sounds maybe alien to you, but it's the typical contract we sign for bank accounts, phone services, forcing our kids into schools, gas, water, electricity and any other benefit. So The following is based. It's UK based, but it applies in Europe. Europe's more secretive than the US. You know, in fact, they own the US if you know your stuff. But apparently, Colonel Edward Mandelhouse said the following in a private meeting with President Woodrow Wilson, and the same applies to the UK. Soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. I'll be doing a show on that soon. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work and earn a living. They will be our chattel, and we will hold the security interest over them forever by operation of law merchant under the scheme of secure transactions. Americans, by unknowingly or unwittingly delivering the bills of lading to us, will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent, forever to remain economic slaves through taxation secured by their pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit, and they will be none the wiser. For not one man in a million could ever figure our plans out, and if by accident one or two would figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges. They will inevitably reap to us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations, and leave every American a contributor to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. So, without realising it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur, and in this manner every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless and without any hope for their redemption, and we will employ the high office of the president of our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America. It's the same in the UK. Just replace the UK with American president with prime minister. So this is really how the system works. But much like the sources of energy as shown in the Matrix movie from 1999, in which the protagonist discovers the reality of his existence, then battles his controllers. And I reckon we could do the same if we weren't so hooked into their systems of distractions. And I'll be doing separate videos on these issues and likely putting forward a few solutions. Until then, we're all chattel property. If I can leave you with anything worth understanding, I'm going to say it again. You are not your name, and your name is not you. Okay, moving on, let's talk about the police. That really shouldn't have happened. Okay, I want to explain the policeman's role and why we have more power than them. I think it's quite important that you understand this, because they've got so much power, and you know, we're born into that system, so we just think that it's normal, but it's not. It's quite unnatural. If you look at an oath sworn by a police constable, you know, you'll see the following. It says, I, name of, you know, wherever, do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will well and truly serve the Queen in the office of constable, with fairness, integrity, diligence and impartiality, upholding fundamental human rights and according equal respect to all people, and that I will, to the best of my power, cause the peace to be kept and preserved, and prevent all offences against people and property, and that while I continue to hold the said office, I will, to the best of my skill and knowledge, discharge all the duties thereof faithfully according to law. Also, if you look up the definition of constable, you'll find the following. Constable, or constable as we say in the UK, an officer generally elected by the people who possesses power as a conservator of the peace at common law and by virtue of various legislative enactments. And he may therefore apprehend a supposed offender without a warrant, at such things as treason, felony, breach of the peace, and for some misdemeanors less than felony when committed in his view. In his view. He may also arrest a supposed offender upon the information of others, but he does so at his peril. This is so important because, you know, I used to get stopped in the street a lot, and the police would have an excuse and say, well, a woman up the road told us that she saw you selling drugs. And I'd say to them, well, bring that person forward, because they have to bring forward your accuser, you see. and that messes them up and they go away. But sometimes they don't bother and they still arrest you, and it's often and believe me, these people exist. It's a grass who lives in the area, and they do police work, and they sign forms as witnesses when the police want to like nick somebody for nothing. So and I'll say that again, he can act on the supposed word of somebody else, on the information of others, but he does so at his peril. So if a policeman hasn't seen you actually commit a crime and he's acting on the word of someone else, and you know this is unlawful, bash them. You can fight them. You win in court. Trust me. So this is important to know, and I say this time and time again. If a constable doesn't have reasonable suspicion or is acting on the suspicion of another, and you already make that clear to him, and he has no reason to arrest you, you can use whatever force is necessary as self-defense to ward off any attempt at his unlawful arrest, unless he can show you that a felony has been committed by you, as well as a reasonable doubt of the suspicion that the party being arrested is guilty. Other than that, fight them hard. If it's one on their own, they very rarely do it. You can bash them and get away. If there's two, you've got to have a few of your mates with you as well. Just bash them and run away anyway. Yes, I said it. They're just men. They're thugs in suits. That's all. They don't have any power over you. They're just men. And if you've not committed a crime, you don't deserve to be hassled by anybody. And it's not good enough that these thugs just stop people and ask them to empty out their pockets or question them or interrupt their lives for no reason. And you've got to make sure that if you are nicked without them establishing who they are, their station and the reason for arrest, it's unlawful, and you will win damages. So I get passionate about that. He also has power to call others to his assistance, and he may appoint a deputy, so he can get someone to assist with the arrest. And, I love society and I want society to work. So I agree, if someone's committing a crime, you see someone doing something nasty or hurting someone, go over and use your power, because we all have the power of constable, and we can arrest another person if any of the conditions that I spoke about earlier are met. And also we have England, we have constables of every kind. We have officers with different powers who bear the name of constable anyway, such as Lord High Constable of England, High Constable, Head Constable, Petty Constables, Constables of Castles, Constables of the Tower, Constable of the Fees, Constable of the Exchequer, Constable of the Staple, etc., etc. However, we're dealing with police constables, but they're no longer constables upholding their oaths. They're police officers in a police force. They're a force of officers that are increasingly working for private companies, and as usual stand as a form of protection between us, the proletariat, and the rich, and they no longer serve or protect the public. So when these guardians of the ruling elite ask for more powers, always vote against them. Never ever grant them any more power than they assume they already have. The police, they're not that good. Be careful what you wish for.
There's a man who contradicts. Wait, he's the type of guy to tell you there's no first place, but he's part of a race. Eyes lie, but take a look inside. They mirror the sights you'll see.
Okay, I'm going to go out on this one. So let's talk about Newspeak. So why are we so confused? Why are we always arguing and fighting on Facebook? Well, let me say this. The deliberate alteration of words or meaning of words to achieve political or social ends is the main reason. The extreme version of this practice was referred to as Newspeak by George Orwell, describing the practices and propaganda in 1984. And Newspeak referred to a practice used by the government to reduce the amount of words and language in order to inhibit the exercise of independent thought by the public. And this had the effect of cutting people off from information about their past and limiting their ability to interact with each other regarding present circumstances. And this is a method used by the United Kingdom when they control, try to take over the whole world. They don't, apart from the actual savagery and physical forces they use, they also use money and banking as well. They're strong pound. But they also use communication and language. They set up a BBC channel in every single country that they, invade, and they also do deals to set them up in other countries that they haven't, and then they just keep on sending out the word. And with so many channels open to us, feeding us so much nonsense, we slowly succumb to the soothing hypnotism that is practiced by our masters. And not only were words given limited definitions, many were eliminated altogether. And when those in position of public responsibility and the public do not agree on the definition of words, everyone in the process becomes the political target of political manipulation. An alternative to Newspeak, reduction of words and definitions, would be the expansion of the number of words until no one is capable of arriving at a certain meaning for whatever they read or hear. And this would be another method to achieve the same objective of controlling communications. And this is why we're fighting and arguing on Facebook all the time, because everyone wants the world to know their truth, and there is no truth. If there's one person, there's truth, it's your truth. As soon as there's two people, because you have different perceptions of life and different cultural backgrounds, different parents, different height even, you're going to perceive things differently, and your truths are both going to be different. The things that you agree with, that's about being civil. You're going to agree and say, oh yeah, that's the truth, we agree on that. But typically, you're not going to. And by feeding us and taking away words and creating new things like the Mandela effect and so on, it just gets us all to disagree with each other. And while we fight, they suddenly build this strong leadership, what they claim strong leadership, and then like sheep, we go and vote for them. I do try and keep away from politics, so don't count that as a political rant. It's me talking about the people who vote, and they just end up fighting about who they're going to fight for. And because they want to be strong about their own beliefs and their own truths, they just go and vote anyway, regardless of the negative stuff that their party's actually doing. Anyway, intentionally or unintentionally, ambiguous or altered definitions of words they greatly inhibit communication. It confuses matters and removes people from a knowledge of history and the majority of information resources simply because they don't understand the traditional meaning of the words. Sure, they have access to information in abundance, but what benefit is derived if they cannot understand the definition of the words being used? Even more disturbing is the fact that the readers might happen to come away believing that their false views are flawed conclusions are absolutely correct. And there's a difference between the use of slang and the deliberate alterations of meanings for political purposes. However, the end result is all the same. And on that note, I'm done talking. Thanks for watching. I'm the OBG. I don't think people really know the true hypnotic power of television. And you know how it feels us in and just keeps telling us to consume, buy, and tells us to hate each other and separates us and causes the greatest divides, all under the name of entertainment. And every time I turn on my TV, it's just like no surprise. It's all of those programs and they're pushing out lies.